Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because tonight's story isn't just about television history. It's about the man behind one of the most familiar faces America ever trusted. For more than 30 years, Johnny Carson wasn't just a TV host, he was a nightly ritual. Families planned their evenings around his monologue. Couples fell asleep to his voice. For millions of Americans, Carson represented calm, humor, and stability in a world that often felt chaotic. He smiled, he joked, and he never seemed rattled. But that version of Johnny Carson was carefully constructed. Behind the desk, behind the curtain, and far away from the studio lights lived a man who was guarded, distant, and often deeply unhappy. While the audience believed they knew him, the real Johnny Carson remained almost completely hidden. This story isn't about punchlines or celebrity interviews. It's about the emotional cost of wearing a mask for decades, about control mistaken for confidence, and about how fame can protect secrets just as easily as it exposes them. To understand Carson, you have to look beyond the applause and into the silences he never filled. When Johnny Carson officially took over The Tonight Show in 1962, late-night television was still an experiment. No one knew if Americans would commit to staying up that late, night after night. Carson changed that entirely. He did shock audiences or challenge them aggressively. Instead, he made them comfortable. His humor was sharp but safe, intelligent without being alienating. At a time when the nation faced assassinations, war, civil rights unrest, and cultural upheaval, Carson stayed carefully balanced. He wasn't radical. He wasn't overtly political. He understood the boundaries of Middle America and never crossed them accidentally. That restraint was part of his genius, but it was also part of his survival strategy. The show wasn't just entertainment. It was a massive business operation tied to sponsors, affiliates, and network expectations. Carson protected it fiercely, knowing that one wrong move could shatter the trust he had spent years building. The success was unprecedented. The Tonight Show dominated its time slot year after year in a way no late-night program has managed since. Carson won multiple Emmy Awards, received the Television Academy's Governor's Award, and earned a Peabody for excellence in broadcasting. He was inducted into the Television Hall of Fame while still actively hosting, a rare honor. After retirement, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom and was celebrated by the Kennedy Center. On paper, his life reads like the ultimate American success story. Fame, respect, money, and universal recognition. But those achievements masked a growing emotional isolation. The same discipline that made Carson reliable on camera slowly disconnected him from genuine human connection. Applause became easier to manage than intimacy. What most people didn't realize was how uncomfortable Johnny Carson actually was around others. Fellow broadcaster Dick Cavett once described him as one of the most socially uneasy people he had ever known. Carson avoided eye contact, disliked casual conversation, and struggled with emotional openness. To cope, he carried a deck of cards everywhere, performing magic tricks when anxiety took over. It wasn't entertainment, it was armor. Performing gave him control. Without a role to play, he felt exposed. This contradiction defined his entire existence. On television, he created intimacy effortlessly. Off camera, he avoided it whenever possible. People mistook his on-screen warmth for personal affection, but it rarely extended beyond the broadcast. Once the cameras stopped rolling, so did the connection. The structure of The Tonight Show itself reflected Carson's personality. The monologue, the desk, the guest chair, the closing act, this format became the blueprint for every late-night show that followed. Hosts from David Letterman to Jay Leno borrowed directly from Carson's model. But behind the scenes, the atmosphere could be tense and unpredictable. Carson demanded control. He held grudges. He remembered slights. Staff learned quickly that crossing invisible lines had consequences. The show functioned less like a collaborative environment and more like a monarchy. Johnny Carson ruled absolutely, even when he appeared relaxed. The audience saw ease. The staff felt pressure. By the early 1970s, The Tonight Show was no longer just a program. It was an institution. At the center of its operation was executive producer Fred DeCordova, a man whose job went far beyond logistics. His real role was emotional management. Johnny Carson was highly sensitive, resistant to interference, and intolerant of challenges to his authority. De Cordova learned to anticipate Carson's moods before they surfaced. For years, the partnership worked. Guests who upset Carson quietly disappeared from the booking list. Staff who crossed boundaries were frozen out. Everything existed to protect the host's comfort and control. That balance shattered after a personal tragedy. In the early 1990s, Carson's son Richard was killed in a car accident. When Carson returned to the show, he did something incredibly rare. He spoke openly about his grief on air. The segment ran long. From a production standpoint, time was running out. De Cordova signaled that the show needed to wrap. To Carson, that moment felt like betrayal. In his mind, professionalism looked like cruelty. The response was immediate and permanent. Carson banned De Cordova from the set for the remainder of the show's run. There were no reconciliations. Loyalty, once questioned, was erased. To viewers, Carson seemed friendly and accessible. To those who worked with him, he remained distant. Guests often assumed they had formed a bond during interviews, only to realize later that Carson barely remembered them. He didn't socialize before tapings and almost never after. The relationship ended when the interview did. This wasn't arrogance, it was self-preservation. Conversation was his job, not his comfort. After performing intimacy for hours, he withdrew completely. Even Ed McMahon later admitted that parts of Johnny were unreachable. Silence ruled the breaks between laughter. There was only one notable exception. When Orson Welles appeared on the show in the 1970s, Carson personally greeted him backstage. Staff were stunned. Carson admired Welles deeply and treated him with reverence rather than charm. For a moment, the armor dropped. That moment stood out because it was so rare. In decades of hosting, Carson formed almost no lasting friendships. Warmth existed for the audience, not for real life. Off camera, Carson's private life was far messier than his public image suggested. He married 4 times. 3 marriages ended in divorce. Each followed a familiar pattern: charm, withdrawal, suspicion, and emotional distance. Carson didn't know how to nurture intimacy. He managed it like a performance. Alcohol worsened everything. His drinking was an open secret in Hollywood. Mood swings, cruelty, and unpredictability followed. In the early 1980s, he was arrested for driving under the influence, shattering his carefully maintained image. He admitted publicly that he had a problem, but acknowledgement didn't lead to lasting change. The most painful consequences of Carson's behavior appeared in his role as a father. He had 3 sons, and his relationship with them was strained. One son, Richard, struggled deeply with alcoholism and mental illness. When Richard required hospitalization, Johnny Carson refused to visit him. Despite immense wealth and influence, he chose distance. Friends later described it as emotional abandonment. Carson could face millions nightly, but not his own child in crisis. Years later, tensions exploded publicly during an industry event. Richard, intoxicated and struggling, clashed with his father in front of executives and media figures. The argument escalated. Witnesses reported Carson nearly struck his own son before being restrained. It was a moment that revealed how fragile the carefully controlled image truly was. As the most powerful interviewer in American television, Carson knew secrets. He wasn't naive. He understood how Hollywood manufactured images and buried truths. He knew which stories could destroy careers, and he kept them. Actors like Rock Hudson appeared as symbols of masculinity while hiding their true selves. Carson knew the reality and calibrated his interviews accordingly. The pressure of maintaining these illusions weighed on him more than he admitted publicly. He knew about Cary Grant's life with Randolph Scott. He understood how studios reframed intimacy as companionship. He watched truth become mythology. With Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, Carson saw how ambiguity was smoothed into legend. These weren't accidents. They were systems, and Carson was part of maintaining them. Raymond Burr's fabricated biography disturbed Carson deeply. Fake marriages, fake children, fake military service. Interviewing Burr felt like interviewing a character rather than a man. The lie had consumed the person beneath it. Carson recognized the psychological cost of living inside fiction for decades. Late in life, Carson expressed discomfort with his role in maintaining these illusions. He questioned whether entertainment had crossed into exploitation. But reflection came too late to change anything. The system had already benefited him enormously. Johnny Carson made America laugh for 30 years, but laughter didn't mean happiness. Behind the desk lived a man shaped by fear, control, and emotional distance. Fame protected him, but it also trapped him. The Tonight Show felt warm and familiar, but its truth was colder. The mask never fully came off until long after the cameras stopped rolling. Carson remains a legend, but legends are rarely simple. He was both a product of Hollywood and one of its greatest beneficiaries. So what do you think? Was Johnny Carson a victim of the system, or one of the men who mastered it best? Share your thoughts in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for more stories from behind the spotlight.